There's greatness in you. But there's not an ounce of humility. You think that you can't make mistakes, but there's gonna come a moment when you realize you're wrong about that. And you're gonna get yourself and everyone under your command killed. You think you're safe. You are not. Is there anything you would not do for your family?
Hi everyone, welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perona, and today I have with me Steve Avona. Say hi, Steve.
Hey, Carlos.
Today we're going to be tackling the latest Star Trek sequel, Star Trek Into Darkness. Now, obviously for those of you who might not be familiar with this is what could be considered the third incarnation of Trek in the movie theater, even though the first original Shatner Treks kind of passed the torch to the next generation Treks, but there's a big difference, in terms of original Trek, next gen Trek, and this is the third wave of Trek, if you will, as far as movie theaters go. Mm-hmm. This is the second film into the series of new films, both of them directed by J.J. Abrams, and it continues into what we started last time on the previous Star Trek film of this being an alternate universe of Trek, which is something that's very important when it comes to how we both feel about this film.
Right.
Now, we've never had a chance to actually do a show about the previous film.
No, that's right.
We've done other Trek stuff, we've done commentaries, and we might have talked about Trek in different manners, but we've never really gone deep into the last film, partially because we had such polarizing opinions of it. This time around, we have a new film, and I imagine we're in the same camp, or maybe even worse, in terms of how different we feel about this.
We're worse.
So, Steve, if you don't mind, can you give us a little background in terms of what is this new Star Trek about? Not just this movie, but how is this, which is a question we ask ourselves all the time. Is this a reboot? Is this a sequel? Is this a remake? What is this technically?
Well, technically, we're dealing with an alternate timeline because
So it's a sequel.
Yeah, I mean, it is not technically a reboot the same way that, say, something like Battlestar is a reboot,
Right.
because Battlestar has no connection to the original.
Right.
I mean, it's inspired by it, but it's not directly...
Right. There's nods, but they're not the same characters no matter how you slice it.
Right. So
This is the same thing.
Right. With Trek, this universe was created because Spock, as portrayed by Leonard Nimoy, travels back through time and basically changes history
Right.
in the first film and sets in motion different events that would have originally happened in what they call the Prime universe. They call Spock Prime.
Right.
And
This is a parallel universe, basically, which Spock, Prime Spock, if you will, happens to now be living in.
Yes.
He seems to be there stuck in it, or by choice or by whatever. He is now part of that secondary parallel universe.
Yes. And the filmmakers did this so they would not be constrained to follow the existing history of Trek, and they could sort of go off on their own, not be tied to the events of the original, and yet still put their own spin on things that already happened.
Well, it sounds like they wanted to dip into stories that have already been told.
Well, I would say that this film proves that.
Right, more than even the previous film. The previous film, even though they tell us how this parallel universe originated, it tries to at least in a manner, deal with a character, your bad guy, quote unquote, who is completely new. We've never heard of this guy. He's a completely new baddie. Okay, fine, great. But this time around, we know the rules already. We know we're dealing in this parallel universe. We're not dipping in any shape or form. But they decided to focus on what a lot of diehard Trekkies consider to be holy ground.
Oh, seriously. Sacred. Sacred. And I think that's their biggest mistake. In my opinion, what they should have just done is, like with the first film, go off and tell your own stories. I think I would have been a lot more accepting had they done that. But in this film, they do the complete opposite. And again, spoiler alert, this is a remake of The Wrath of Khan.
Well, I found that it was a remake of a lot of different things. It was not only Wrath of Khan, but it also had a little bit of Star Trek 3.
A little bit. Tiny bit.
And if you haven't figured out by now, Steve really dislikes this film. I really like this film.
Yeah, intensely
They
disliked
throw
it.
a lot of references to just about every Star Trek thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
If you're a big fan, I'm talking about Deep Space Nine stuff, classic original series, just about everything. If you listen close enough, there's little bits and pieces for everybody.
Yeah, there are Easter eggs everywhere, but that didn't impress me in the slightest.
Well, let's talk about the story in terms of how these guys decide to deliver the story.
Right. Well, it's funny because it doesn't really turn into a remake of The Wrath of Khan until about, I'd say, halfway through the movie. The movie starts off with...
Yeah, the first half is like a whodunit.
Right.
It's almost like a serial. You're hunting down a bad guy that you don't know who he is.
Yeah. The Enterprise is on a mission where, they're, I guess, observing this new culture.
Your typical Star Trek do not interfere mission.
Yeah, the natives and whatever, and,
the volcano is going to explode.
Right. And I mean, isn't the point of that so they can save the planet? That Spock is there to
Yeah, it's the
stop
typical
that.
Prime Directive conundrum. We cannot interfere, but we don't want them to die either.
Right, exactly. So, again, it makes for, as the original film did, a pretty impressive set piece opening sequence where it just, kind of dives right in with, Spock in the volcano and Kirk and McCoy being chased. And stupid thing number one is having the Enterprise underwater. It looks pretty, but it's ridiculous. Just from you wanted an impressive visual, but you put the ship underwater. It's never supposed to be underwater. I mean, yeah, there are going to be many points in this conversation where I go
That
into
could never
serious...
happen in the real world.
No, exactly.
What's wrong with these people?
Not in the real Trek world, and I'm going to be that person. I'm going to be that person who calls them out.
The point of this opening sequence, I believe, is to show you what a stickler, for example, Spock still is about logic and law and the rules, and what a hothead,
Kirk
whatever
is.
I have to do to get the mission done type of guy that Kirk is. And you see that banter. It happens actually originally with McCoy. They still have that nice rapport with each other, and they accomplish the mission in a way because they do save the planet, I guess.
Right.
But in the process, they interfere with these primitive aliens who now recognize the ship, and it's like, oh crap, what does that mean now?
Yeah, they're going to think they're gods.
And then when he thinks he's going to get a medal or something and get promoted, but instead he's going to get demoted.
Right, and he's going to lose the ship.
Pike is there to basically ream him out.
Right. But then you have this other sort of subplot going on with this character who...
His daughter is sick.
Yeah, the daughter is sick, and all of a sudden Benedict Cumberbatch shows up, this mysterious guy, says, I can cure your daughter, but you have to do this mission for me. And what it ends up happening...
He cures his daughter.
He cures the daughter, and the guy has to blow up what they initially say is Starfleet Archive.
An archival facility or something.
Right, and that triggers this emergency meeting of all the admirals and the flagship commanders.
Yeah, their second in commands, which at this point, because Kirk has been demoted, he's now the second in command to Pike. At the Enterprise.
And Spock is first officer
Somewhere
to
else.
Another ship. And I don't know if you noticed this, but that scene was a complete ripoff of a scene from Godfather 3. With Al Pacino and Andy Garcia.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Godfather, the original, when James Caan gets machine gunned in the toll booth.
Godfather 3, when the helicopter comes and they're locked in the room and they all get killed except for, I mean, come on.
It's funny. I just recently watched Godfather 1 and 2 on Blu-ray, and I still haven't touched 3. When I see it, I'm going to think of what you're saying.
Yep, trust me.
I'll do it.
He stole it. So, and of course, that sets up the whole, Kirk is on a mission of vengeance and,
Right.
He wants to take this guy out. And
Now,
he
the
gets
guy in charge
ship.
of military Starfleet, I guess, if you will, is Mr. RoboCop himself.
Peter Weller.
Peter Weller, great actor. And he's
Fantastic
obviously a very
actor.
militaristic kind of guy. He's like, you got to hunt this guy down. And Kirk's like, I'll do it. You just set me, point to me, because apparently he's hiding in one of the Klingon planets.
Yeah, he's hiding on the Klingon homeworld of Kronos.
Right, but their intelligence is telling them that he's hiding in an area that's very unpopulated. So it's almost kind of like a covert mission. If Kirk goes without any official Starfleet insignias with a small crew, he can capture him or, I guess, blow him to bits or something.
Well, he wants him to kill him.
Right, he wants them to kill him, but they introduce into this mission the concept of, we're going to load the Enterprise with these special torpedoes.
Right.
And at the time, we don't know what these torpedoes are, and it's questionable. Right. And we're also introduced to another new character, a female character, and tell us about her.
Essentially, she's Carol Marcus, who we learned in Wrath of Khan, who is the mother of Kirk's son David. In this timeline, this is where they first meet. She's the daughter of Admiral Marcus.
But she doesn't let that out of the bag.
Right.
She keeps it quiet because she doesn't want everybody to know who she is.
Right, and she's basically there to look pretty and be shown in her underwear.
I don't have a problem with that.
I don't either, but, she adds nothing to the film, and it's a pointless character, as far as I was concerned. It's just, stick another Wrath of Khan reference in there. But she's supposedly not in cahoots with her father.
That was an interesting point that I was like, is she going to help him, or is she there to kind of supervise what he secretly is trying to do, or she's completely clueless? And apparently she is completely clueless, because by the time they get to the planet and they attempt to capture or kill him, again, there's this very kind of like an Osama bin Laden vibe to this character of a, listen, I don't care, just kill him, get him the hell out of here. He's a threat to everything we're doing.
Yeah.
And, he's hiding in the Klingon world. What is he trying to get us in trouble with the Klingons? Because at this particular time, we still don't have a Klingon war. We're pre-Klingon war, apparently.
Well, that's the thing. We're on the verge of one, it seems like, in this film that's coming soon. And that might even be the subject of the next film.
Well, who knows? I mean, I'll tell you about things having to do with the next film when we're closer to the end.
Yeah.
But as far as this goes, they arrive there, they try to capture him. They can't capture him because the Klingons find the Enterprise crew before. So it's a cat and mouse with the Klingons fighting and flying around. They have to land eventually. They're about to be captured by the Klingons, and all of a sudden, Harrison attacks the Klingons before they're able to kill the Enterprise crew. So it's kind of weird. It's like, wait, why is he helping us?
Right, exactly.
So everything kind of slows down. They get away, and Harrison is taken prisoner, right?
Well, he basically surrenders. He surrenders when he hears that they have the torpedoes.
Right.
He gets kind of a look on his face, and he basically says, okay, I surrender.
Well, the option is supposed to be surrender, or we're going to just fire all these torpedoes at you.
Right.
And he asks him, how many do you have? Which is a
they
bizarre
say
question.
72.
And Spock tells him, and at that moment, he's like, okay, I give up. I'm done. It's like, what the hell just happened here? So he gives up. They bring him to the Enterprise. Very mysterious. They all know something's up because the man could not have given up. He was not in any position to give up.
He would have destroyed them.
He would have destroyed everybody at that rate.
Right.
He seemed to have very amazing fighting skills, not only with the weapons, but just by bare hands. He was like destroying all these Klingons. So they interrogate him at their, holding cell they have in there?
Mm-hmm.
And the big reveal of the movie is that this guy is Khan.
This British guy is an Indian Sikh.
Well, I don't know if they're going that far in terms of, I don't know if they're giving him that origin. I don't know.
But you see, here's another nitpicky thing. Khan should still be who he is because this happened before Spock changed the timeline. Khan was Khan and was exiled and put in cryo sleep and all that other stuff in supposedly in the 1990s.
You're saying that everything before Spock's arrival should be exactly the same.
Those are the rules that they should be following.
Okay, I understand that. That's interesting. That makes sense.
I think that's, kind of BS.
In this particular version of it, they do find out that he has a background of being some kind of a militaristic, experimental Superman type of character who was exiled from Earth, very much like Wrath of Khan, and that somehow, I forget exactly how, Peter Weller's character revived them. He found them floating in space and revived them in order to be able to, train by him in his tactics? Have him help him work for him?
Yeah, to work for him. And, they call it Section 31, which was in Deep Space Nine.
That's it. That's exactly where that used to be. Yeah.
Which was more of a sort of an espionage
right.
agency.
It's kind of like a super secret CIA type of agency.
Yeah, which he is turning into, like more of a real heavy-duty militaristic
right.
thing.
And from what you get from his character, he wants to basically spark a war with the Klingons before the Klingons can start. He wants to basically bait them into a war by throwing this character and all his minions into it.
Right. Yeah.
And even sending Kirk in there, too. It's all part of a plan to incite a war.
Mm-hmm. And Kirk isn't, I don't think, supposed to have come out of it alive either.
Right. Because as they're interrogating Khan, they're approached by what looks like to be a Federation ship, very similar to the Enterprise design, but 2-3 times bigger, gigantic looking thing.
Yeah, the USS Vengeance.
Right, which is something we've never seen before. Mm-hmm. And at first, Kirk tries to kind of play off of here, we caught your guy, we're here to, to give him to you. Just one question. He was kind of pulling a Columbo. One question before I leave. What was the deal with the blah, blah, blah? So they kind of both read each other. Him. They both understand that Kirk knows what's going on because Khan told him everything.
Right.
And this guy's ready to just blow him out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when his daughter, we find out, is not in cahoots with him. And she's kind of, surprised at the fact of what his father's doing. And before she can really do anything about it, he beams her out of the ship.
Yeah, and that's where it becomes, the Kirk and Khan team up.
Right, which is something that I believe we've never seen before. This is something a little different.
Oh, yeah.
And he even says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that kind of thing. Knowing damn well he can't trust this guy to the extent where they have to, because their ship is so heavily damaged by the Vengeance, they're really just waiting to be blown up. But in the mix of the story, we forgot to mention that when these torpedoes were being loaded into the Enterprise, Scotty had a real problem with that. He didn't want them there because he didn't know what they had. He was afraid that whatever was in these torpedoes could damage the engines to the point where he gets into an argument with Kirk, and Kirk tells him, all right, get out of here. You don't want to be here? Don't be here. And he leaves.
Which I think is ridiculous. I mean, okay, Scotty resigns.
Okay, I don't know. Did he do it on purpose? I don't know. Maybe not. Didn't seem like it.
It was just a stupid plot device to get Scotty off the ship to have him in the movie later.
In the moment where they realize something weird is starting to happen, and I think this happened before they arrived on that planet. I think he was already suspecting this before. He sends a message to Scotty telling him, listen, can you go look into this, blah, 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 some coordinates that I think Khan gives him. And Scotty goes, he's in civilian mode, I guess, and with his little weird-looking friend, and he goes off to some space station to see what's going on.
Space dock.
Yeah, and we don't know what's, because they don't show us what's happening, but something, he's like, oh, that's interesting. He sneaks into the facility. Well, what basically ended up happening is he was hiding in the Vengeance because that was a secret Federation ship they were building.
Yep.
And just as the Vengeance is about to blow the Enterprise out of the water, Scotty, as usual, sabotages the Vengeance. Kind of like when Scotty sabotaged the
Excelsior.
The Excelsior, and the whole thing can't fly. I can't fly for 5 more minutes, Captain. That type of crap. And that gives them enough time for Kirk and Khan to put on, I guess, these space jumpsuits and to jump from one ship to the other. Another great visually exciting scene where they're dodging bits and pieces of the Enterprise, because the Enterprise, similar to Star Trek II, took one hell of a beating, blowing up pieces left and right, which it's like, I didn't know it could take that much damage. But as you said before, if the Enterprise can go underwater, then hell, all bets are off. So they make it to the other ship, and Scotty lets them in, and now they're inside, and Kirk even tells Scotty, listen, when we get to the bridge, take him out, because this guy's going to betray us the second he gets a chance. They get to the bridge, boom, Scotty takes him out. I guess they stun him. And what do you remember from that point?
Well, they get to the bridge of the Vengeance, Khan and Kirk, and they're fighting their way to the bridge, and they get to the bridge, and Khan kills Admiral Marcus.
At this point, he's in complete Khan mode. He wants to just kill everybody. Even though he has this kind of soft alliance with Kirk, he's done with the whole Federation. And he tells Kirk, okay, give me the missiles or I blow up your ship.
Right.
And Kirk is like, all right, give him the missiles. Little did we know at the time, we actually knew this, we just forgot to tell you, McCoy and Dr. Marcus, the love interest, if you will, they actually go down to some planet to disarm one of the missiles because they want to know what's inside of them. And they find out that inside the missile, there's people in them. There's one person on each missile. And this is basically the rest of Khan's crew.
Right.
They're all hidden in these missiles. They're not missiles. They're cryogenic chambers.
Right.
Again, similar to the original. Everybody's in their own cryo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
So he makes the deal with Khan. Okay, you let my ship go and I give you the missiles. He gives them the missiles. Typically, Khan betrays Kirk and says, all right, I'm going to send you back to your ship so you can die there.
You can die there.
You know, that kind of thing. So right before he's ready to blow the Enterprise out of the water, the missiles explode because they had substituted the actual people in the cryo chambers with actual explosives.
Right.
So they detonate the Vengeance, which gives Kirk now time to escape and get the hell out of there in his damaged Enterprise. So they're puttering along in warp drive. You know, they're in the hyper warp tunnel, whatever you call that thing. And all of a sudden, the Vengeance shows up. You know, it's also damaged, but it's catching up and it's catching up and it's catching up.
And Khan is insane now because he thinks all his people are dead.
Right. Again, it's very reminiscent of Khan in the Reliant, you know, after his crew is dead and he's the only one left who just wants to just destroy everything around them. He's just enraged.
Here at this point, you know, the Enterprise has been so damaged. I mean, it's taken more of a pounding than I ever thought.
Right. And it can't stay in warp drive. It has to come out of warp drive.
Right. And they come out by Earth and it looks like they're in free fall.
Right.
And again, you know, nothing can be done, blah, blah, blah. And here's where, you know, we really sort of get into serious Wrath of Khan territory.
But they flip it.
They flip it. And it's Kirk who is, you know, going to the radiation chamber to fix the problem that, you know, is going to be fatal while Spock is on the bridge, you know, trying to escape from Khan. And that's what happens. Kirk, you know, does the whole switcheroo thing, which again, this is just another opportunity for me to call them stupid. When Leonard Nimoy did it in Star Trek 2, it, you know, you didn't quite know what he was doing, but in this, you know, Kirk is kicking something to get like the warp core in alignment.
To align it back into place, yes.
And it just looks ridiculous, I thought. But he does it, he succeeds, and, you know, the Enterprise is able to, you know, regain power and obviously not crash. And that's when Spock, you know, again, they parallel Wrath of Khan, you know, they say, Spock, you better get down here. And he goes and he sees Kirk and they have the flip-flop of the Spock death scene, you know, from Wrath of Khan, except now it's Kirk who dies.
And I'll give you this, and I know you hated it, and I hated it too. And I'll admit to it.
Yeah.
The Khan scream that they did here, Spock making the Khan scream, to me was equivalent to the no scream from Vader in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They didn't have to do that.
No.
I understand why they did it.
Yeah.
Even with me, who really loved this movie, that was too much.
Well, there's one thing we agree on, at least. I'm just going to take this a step further here and say that, and don't get me wrong, I think that Zachary Quinto and Chris Pine are very good actors, and I think that as Kirk and Spock, they do well as those characters, but I think that the material that they're given is and I think that, first of all, the scene, it has no, you know, as far as I'm concerned, they're Kirk and Spock, they've known each other for 5 minutes, as opposed to, you know, the Kirk and Spock in Wrath of Khan. There's just so much more emotional depth to that scene.
Well, yeah, exactly. You have not only, in the case of Wrath of Khan, not only do you have 2 movies, but you have an entire television series behind these 2 characters.
Right.
And you have all this time to build this relationship between them.
Right.
Now, granted, I buy the emotional problems they're having, but again, the scream was too much. I felt okay with the death scene. It's fine. Yes, I know they're doing a flip. I get it. But the scream, I think, took it way over.
And I think that the problem with Zachary Quinto, again, you know, he's a pretty good Spock, but I don't think that he has sort of mastered the whole Vulcan human sort of struggle that Spock, the inner struggle that Spock has. He comes off more often than not, and I was saying this to another friend of ours, another colleague who loves Trek as much as I do, when he gets mad or angry, it reminds me of the episode where he was going through the Ponfar and he was all hot and bothered and crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's how he is. And it just doesn't strike the balance that Leonard Nimoy was able to strike, even as a younger actor in the original series.
But let me ask you a question. And again, I know that anything I say can make me sound like somebody who's just defending the movie, but is it possible that in these films, Spock is not as balanced as he was before? In other words, before he had more of a Vulcan control. Is
Right.
it possible that this Spock, for whatever reasons, I don't know if it happened in this film or in the previous film, or we never saw exactly why it happened, that he is in less Vulcan control? Hell, he's dating Uhura.
Well, yeah, don't get me started on that. But he kind of alludes to it in this film when he's talking about the fact that his entire homeworld was destroyed and 90% of his population was wiped out.
So that might have scarred him, I guess.
Oh, yeah, and that's valid, but I can buy that. It's just a matter of, probably me being resistant to, and I can admit this, resistant to new interpretations of characters that I think should be done in a certain way, and they're kind of branching off doing their own thing, which
again, even though, it's a switch that people can just say, flip the switch, because if you flick the switch, then you can make an argument against it. But yeah, even though these are not supposed to be the same characters.
well, yes and no.
Exactly. It's not a remake. It's not a reboot. It's an alternate. So
Right.
obviously we don't have experience. We really don't have experience dealing with alternate anythings, really.
Right.
I mean, how do you react to alternate this?
Right.
I mean, what, Back to the Future is the closest thing we've seen to alternate characters behaving exactly the same way?
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's also this sort of kind of concept of predestination in the movies, that things are going to happen along a certain path, but just in a sort of a tweaked, different way, which I guess...
Tell that to the dead Vulcans.
Yeah, I know, right? Seriously. It sucks for them.
Put that on your Vulcan pipe and smoke it.
And speaking of, and I don't want to overlook this because, if there's anything I forget to criticize, I'm going to be upset. The Leonard Nimoy cameo is completely pointless.
Right.
I mean, I'm always happy to see him. I was happy to see him in the first film, even though I thought that...
Let's just remind people, he's all of a sudden, Spock is trying to figure out whether or not he can trust
Khan
in a situation where he's not near Kirk. He feels that something is not right and something is going really bad. So he puts a message through New Vulcan, I think they call it, or something like that. And who answers the phone? What? Spock Prime.
And again, it's just an excuse to kind of shoehorn Leonard Nimoy in there for a minute. And, he decides to sort of break the rules. Well, he basically just tells young Spock that, they defeated Khan, but at a great price.
Right.
And, he doesn't tell him that he himself was killed.
Technically
At
died.
least I don't get the sense that he did, unless there was like an off-camera part of the discussion.
Well, let's not forget now that after the Vengeance is chasing the Enterprise and it actually gets somewhat damaged by the torpedoes going off, at this point, the Enterprise regains control as a result of Kirk realigning the core, yada, 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 and in the process dying. And now all of a sudden, the Vengeance is the one that comes crashing down into San Francisco and takes out Alcatraz. We see Alcatraz it looks like they were like in the process of refurbishing it.
Yeah.
And the ship smashed it to bits. And then the ship basically crashes into the coast of San Francisco, taking out God knows how many buildings.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, holy crap.
I know. And again, it's...
You don't know how many thousands of people died in that process. And Khan gets out of the ship and starts making a run for it. And Spock is the one that decides, I'm going to go get him because he just killed my best friend, blah, blah, blah.
Well, not just that. Yeah, he wants revenge, but McCoy finds out that
hold
Khan's
on.
blood...
Again, another thing we forgot to tell everybody is that while they had Khan in the brig, they gave him a blood test because I guess McCoy wanted to know what was so special about this guy. What's the deal with him? And while they're kind of in the process of all these things happening, McCoy is injecting like dead tribbles. Again, another Easter egg.
Yeah.
Now, I figured, why would he be injecting a dead tribble? He was like running experiments or something. I don't know. And at some point, the tribble starts to react because, again, in the beginning of the film, we find out that that red thing was the blood, basically, from him. And it's like, okay, that's how they're going to get, because I'm seeing a dead Kirk and I'm like, how are they going to get out of this? Because they have to get out of this. They're not going to take him to Vulcan and have him be reborn or whatever like they did. So, okay, that's the way out of that thing. So the final chase between Khan and the Federation is not with Kirk, but with Spock as the lead character, hand to hand, chasing him from streets to vehicles to this and that. And you get to the point where Spock finally captures him with the help of Uhura, out of all people. She shows up to help him because he still cannot get him exactly, because the guy's super strong. And they cut just as what looks like Spock's about to kill him. And now we are, do you remember?
Oh, yeah. Uhura shows up and, she stuns Khan and they cut immediately to Kirk waking up.
He's at the hospital.
because of Khan's resurrection blood. And now they've apparently cured death thanks to Khan's blood.
Well, they rebox Khan because Khan's not dead, and it
Yeah.
looks like they kind of rebox him and put him in the, where the Ark of the Covenant is hidden,
Yeah.
in the cryo tubes with the rest of them, and it's like, we don't know what's going to happen to him. And the crew of the Enterprise, they get their ship back, and they're about to begin what they were thinking they were getting in the beginning of the film, their 5-year mission. They were going to be assigned, but instead they were getting demoted. Well, now at the end of the film, they are being assigned to their 5-year mission.
Yep.
And that's how it ends. And this is your favorite film of the year, Steve? How come? You explain to me how.
Absolutely. Well, you kind of ignored it when I was talking about Khan's resurrection blood. How stupid is that? They just made Khan's blood cure death.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's a tricky one.
I mean, come on.
But here's another question. Is it just Khan's blood, or is it him and his cohorts?
Well, probably,
Because I read one post, one guy was saying, why go after Khan when you have 71 tubes full of this blood?
Exactly. Exactly.
I think, okay, again, I'm going to be the apologist.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm going to have to stop using the Lucas apologist term and start using the Abrams apologist term.
Yeah,
well,
you're
maybe
gonna have a lot of that
Khan
to
was
do
the
in the next few
original.
years.
Khan was the original experimental Superman that
Right.
had the super blood, and
Right.
everybody else that came after him has been diluted.
Right.
So there you go.
Exactly. And now, too, another concept that pisses me off is this trans-warp beaming.
Beaming?
I mean, where you can just go anywhere at any time, pretty much.
Well, didn't they touch on that a little bit in the first film?
And it was stupid in the first one.
That he was able to grab them from.
Yeah,
something like that. Now, let me ask you a question. What do you think of the Klingons?
Not impressed.
We saw very little of them.
Yeah, but you at least got to see a full-on Klingon.
Do
and
you like the concept, the makeup?
It was okay. It almost felt like it was somewhere in between original series Klingon with movie Klingon.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was okay. They don't add much to the film.
I like the whole film. And the only things that, aside from the Khan, the Scream Khan thing that's obviously that I didn't like, there were certain scenes, yes, whenever they did a classic flip of something we've seen already, it distracted me.
Yeah.
But it was almost like, I still liked it, but it was distracting me a little because it was almost like watching the special effects scene and looking at the special effects instead of concentrating on the story. To me, I found it a little distracting when they did that because I was like, oh, that's so cool. Oh my God, that's because of the episode of blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, relax, Carlos, relax. Watch the movie. Okay, I'm watching the movie now. Anytime something like that would happen, it would distract me a little bit. But I'm telling you, even with all this, even with the distractions, I wanted more. I was ready to sit there for another hour and go, holy crap, now what happens? Are all these guys going to get out of their tubes and attack I was looking for more.
Well, that's more power to you. I felt just the opposite. I'm hoping this film sinks the franchise.
Oh.
To me, look, at the end of the day, I don't feel as strongly as I do the prequels because I'm not as much of a Star Wars fan as I am a Star Trek fan.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt like the problems of the first JJ Star Trek film were magnified here in the sense that you had big action, dialogue scene, big action, dialogue scene, and the dialogue scenes, the way they connected the threads of the plot, I thought were ridiculous. And I thought that it was lazy. Remember the first film, Spock exiles Kirk to the planet that just happens to have old Spock on it?
Yes.
To me, that was a symbol of how dumb and how contrived the plot was and how lazy the writers were. And this could be a whole nother discussion of me ranting. And as much as I love Lost and will always love Lost, I do not understand why people think that Lindelof and Kurtzman and Orsi are God's greatest gift to writers. Because Prometheus sucked and the Star Trek films suck. And I just don't get it. To me, the Star Trek films as they are now are just as big and loud and dumb as the Transformers films. As a Michael Bay film.
I could not disagree with you more.
That's your opinion.
Now, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. Some movies you could say you never know. You either love it or you hate it. And you never know who's going to love it and who's going to hate it.
Right.
I think this is the type of film that because, and again, similar to Star Wars, because of your intense love for the original material.
Right.
Any divergence from that material kills this film.
Well, here's the thing. I would agree with that, but my big problem is not so much that it's new actors and an alternate storyline and whatever, because I liked Battlestar. I liked the reboot of Battlestar very, very much, and I liked the original Battlestar. I mean, I didn't have the intense feelings, obviously, that I have for Star Trek or Star Wars. But why did I think Battlestar was so good? Because it was intelligent, because it was groundbreaking, because it took the story, the inspiration of the original
But
Battlestar.
Steve, Battlestar is a TV show that lasted how many thousands of hours?
Yeah.
I think you got to make that comparison to a movie, because on Battlestar you have the luxury of 1,000+ hours of character development.
I almost think, in all honesty, what I need is I need a new Star Trek series. I need something on television. Give Ron Moore a chance to do Star Trek on television.
But let me ask you another question. Have you ever been happy with a Star Trek series overall? Or, like, for example, Next Gen was a bit of a mess in the beginning, and then it found its footing.
Yeah.
DS9 was kind of a mess, and then it found its footing.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them were kind of like Battlestar Galactica, that maintained, for most of its run, a top caliber of episodes.
Well, I think that Next Gen and Deep Space Nine, once they got on their footing and they got on a roll, they were excellent.
How about Voyager and Enterprise?
Voyager was crap all the way through, and I did watch it all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
Enterprise started off really slow, and I would say by the 4th season, I was loving it, and then it got canceled. But Star Trek is, to me, becoming part of this new generation of blockbuster films that are made not for me. I mean, I have to be honest. I mean, I'm just as into big, dumb blockbusters. I'll go see Fast and the Furious and all that other stuff. But to me, these two Star Trek films, they have no internal logic. And, that bothers me a lot. It's not just that it's not my Star Trek. I could be a little bit more forgiving if I thought that there was some kind of intelligence behind the plot. And I don't see that. And, I'm not criticizing anybody who likes it. I'm just saying that for me, I see the holes. I mean, I saw the holes in the prequels. We could have a whole nother discussion about them too. We never really have.
I don't think this, and this is going to sound worse than it is, but I don't think this film is supposed to have such incredible story that it's like, I don't think it's supposed to have an original story, because they are obviously telling you the alternate con story.
Right.
So,
but then, okay.
like we mentioned before, the previous film was actually a tiny more original, because they're dealing with Nero and the whole Romulan blah, blah, blah. But this
I like the first film better than this.
Huh.
And here's my point, though. What I'm really trying to get at is they're not telling, for me anyway, they're not telling it well. A friend of mine sent me a video that The Onion did that, it was kind of a satire. Star Trek fans hate new Star Trek film because it's exciting and, fast-paced and has great special effects. They want I'll be the first to admit it. I want what I used to have. And I'm never going to get that again, and I'm going to have to live with this. I mean, the general line of thinking is that there's only going to be like maybe one more film with this cast, and they're not going to have the longevity of the original series cast. The thought process is that it's not going to be some indefinite series of films, that they'll do a trilogy, and then there'll be some kind of other reboot. What's interesting is that the rights to Star Trek are split between CBS and Paramount now, so that Paramount does the feature films and CBS could decide, if they choose, to do Star Trek on television completely independently of Paramount and completely independent of whatever Paramount establishes as their Star Trek universe. I'm not saying that's going to happen. There's really been no discussion of it, but that it is a possibility. And down the line, as if this series ends, I think it might be something that's explored, but I'd be more than happy for it to end right here. But it probably won't, and they'll probably do at least one more film and then wrap it up.
Do you know if Abrams has any obligation to continue directing or anything?
No, I don't think he's under any obligation, but I think he's going to either produce or executive produce, the next film, because he's going to be too busy in Star Wars land.
No kidding. It's funny because that's an interesting subject too, is that when Star Wars Episode 7 was announced, and then they announced that Abrams was going to be associated with it, directing it, some people were like, oh no, he's not so much because of bad feelings towards Star Trek, but like, no, he's a Star Trek guy. He can't help Star Wars with the Star Trek thing. I wonder now
Right.
if this is going to hurt him in terms of, that's an interesting thing because you figure that the diehard, a lot of people are either Star Trek or Star Wars people. And to people that are only Star Trek people, to them, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, good. It's a good thing that he's directing this movie because, we're so
get rid of
unhappy
him.
with this that he can then tank Star Wars and we'll get more Trek, in our direction somehow.
But you know what? Honestly, the way I feel about if I'm going to blame somebody for me being upset, I'm not really blaming Abrams. I mean, he's an amazing visual director, but, it's the people who've written the films that I take issue with. And I'm kind of confident with Star Wars anyway that, Michael Arndt is going to deliver a pretty decent script. I have more faith in that than I do with Star Trek because, like I said, and I've made it very clear, I don't understand the love that everybody has for these guys, that Hollywood has for these guys. I just don't see it. And I don't know how much of a hand they had in the writing of Fringe. I did like Fringe very much. But as far as feature films goes, these guys have bombed out every single time out of the gate for me. It's not just Star Trek, because I hated Prometheus with a passion.
Well, it's funny. Prometheus, I have a similar problem with it in terms of there are certain aspects of it that left me questioning so much that by researching, and I know that you shouldn't have to go and research things, but by theorizing and researching, I like the film even more.
Yeah.
It's got a bit of a lost thing to it in terms of the less they tell you, the more crazy you go looking for answers.
Well, that's like you personally,
Yeah.
dude. I don't.
No, I know. It's the lost thing.
Yeah.
Here, there is no lost thing in terms of you can't blame a Lindelof for doing a Lindelof.
Yeah.
There is no mystery here.
Right.
There's your information. Like it or hate it. There it is.
Right.
So
exactly.
that's where you're left with. And in my
Right.
case, I liked it. I mean, I liked it so far as the best film I saw this summer. I
Yeah.
did really like Oblivion, which was another, I like to call it a little film because compared to the blockbusters,
Right.
it's a little film. But when I compare it to something like Iron Man 3, for example, that we talked about in the past, I'm more satisfied with this one.
Yeah.
We've gone way longer than expected. But anyway, I'd like to thank you, Steve, for being here today to have technically our first Trek conversation.
Yeah.
Not a commentary, a conversation.
Right.
And thank you guys for listening, and we will see you here soon, hopefully, on Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Who the hell are you?
A remnant of a time long past. Genetically engineered to be superior so as to lead others to peace in a world at war. But we were condemned as criminals, forced into exile. For centuries we slept, hoping when we awoke things would be different.
But as a result of the destruction of Vulcan, your Starfleet began to aggressively search distant quadrants of space. My ship was found adrift. I alone was revived.
I looked up John Harrison. Until a year ago, he didn't exist.
John Harrison was a fiction created the moment I was awoken by your Admiral Marcus to help him advance his cause. A smokescreen to conceal my true identity. My name is Khan.
Stop.